providing the West continues and NATO continues to give and ramps up the support it gives Ukraine, Ukraine will, I think, ultimately prevail, and Putin will be faced with a collapse.
Time to invite you into our daily briefing room, where one of our leading tactical and strategic minds, with years of experience as a general officer at the highest level of military command, shares their insights into the current state of the war in Ukraine. And joining us today is General Sir Richard Shirreff, former NATO Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Good evening to you, General Shirreff.
Good evening to you, Carl. How nice to see you.
Really good to have you with us tonight. Let's start with that meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Bucharest, which wrapped up last night. Pledges of further support and backing for Ukraine. What do you make of what actually emerged?
Well, it's an important statement. It demonstrates again NATO's solidarity. And that's a major factor, because 30 nations coming together and under the banner of the alliance to pledge their continued support for Ukraine is absolutely critical to Ukraine's long-term determination to achieve their military objectives. Now, clearly, the devil is in the detail. What I hope comes out of it, though, is the right level of support and a real determination to do what needs to be done to support Ukraine.
Of course, they met at a time when Ukraine's biggest problem seems to be the power cuts, with Russia deliberately targeting the energy infrastructure, and those prolonged power cuts in many towns and cities causing misery to millions of citizens and actually putting many of those vulnerable people at risk. I mean, how does NATO respond to that?
Well, clearly it's got to protect Ukraine, or provide the support to Ukraine to allow it to protect itself. And there are two factors here. Number one is air defense missiles, and air defense fighters as well. And I think NATO really needs to double down on providing that sort of support. The second aspect of this is, frankly, humanitarian support to help Ukraine get through what is likely to be a very difficult winter. It will be getting really cold there now, and without power, without water, people will suffer. Now, they're tough, clearly, Ukrainians, and their resolution is in no way dented, but it's going to be a really nasty winter for them. So generators, capacitors, all the capabilities needed to support Ukraine throughout a very difficult winter. There's another aspect as well to that, which I'd like to in terms of the importance of this meeting, which I'd just like to highlight, which is that meeting in Bucharest came at a time when the siren voices urging negotiation were increasingly making themselves felt. We heard General Miley, the United States chairman of the Joint Chiefs, urging Ukraine to think about negotiating. The fact that NATO have not said that, are saying they will provide the support, is really important for Ukraine, and really important to allow the Ukrainians to achieve their aims.
Yeah, and as you mentioned that, we had those comments from Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz, suggesting that Europe should go back to what he called its pre-war peace order with Russia and resolve all questions of common security. I mean, do you think there's a danger that comments like that appear to undermine the much more robust stance that we heard from those NATO foreign ministers?
Well, Chancellor Scholz, with all respect, frankly, could be howling to the moon for all the good that's going to do. He needs to wake up and recognize, as does every European, frankly, that there will not be peace in Europe while Putin is in the Kremlin. So talk of going back to some sort of pre-Ukraine war arrangement with Russia, after what Russia has done to Ukraine, is continuing to do to Ukraine, and would continue to do to Ukraine if we allowed them to, is absolutely ridiculous.
So he's pretty much out of line with the rest of Europe, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he's I don't know what he's smoking, but he's completely out of line with the rest of Europe. But I'm afraid it sums up the German approach to this, which is, frankly, sitting in la-la land, hoping that all's going to go back. to some sort of pre-war nirvana, which of course it won't. They have to wake up and smell the coffee.
Well, you've been pretty clear on all of that. I just wonder what you make of some of the reports we've had emerging from Russia. It's very difficult, of course, to properly assess what is happening inside Russia because of the Kremlin's tight control on information and so on. But we had that leaked report of some supposed Kremlin polling, which suggested falling support for the war in Ukraine amongst the Russian people, and some extraordinary details emerging that appeared to show Russian soldiers, some of them on the front line, wanting to hand themselves in and surrender to the Ukrainians. Do you think there are real signs of Russian morale crumbling?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely, without question. I think the poll you allude to is, or you mentioned it, I think is very interesting. But I think also there's plenty of stuff on Twitter and other social media demonstrating the real, frankly, if not fragility, the fact that morale is broken in many places. And it's no surprise, because if you scoop up indiscriminately large numbers of young men, and not so young men in some cases, off the streets of Russia, put them into uniform or put them into the army with minimal training, telling them to find their own kit, their own uniform, and then expect them to fight, their morale is going to be rock bottom. Add to that the fact that they haven't got the right equipment. The winter, the weather is diabolical. It's wet, it's cold, and it's going to get much colder when the freezing starts. They haven't got any equipment, and what are they there to do? Fight and die for the motherland, attacking another country. It's not surprising that morale is as shaky as it is, and I would expect it to get worse as the winter goes on.
But just briefly, even if there is something of a fall in morale amongst many of the Russian troops, that's not going to deter President Putin, is it? Is it? He seems absolutely determined to use whatever tactics he can to try to pursue this.
Yeah, absolutely, and this goes back to your comments about what we were talking about, Chancellor Scholz. It's ridiculous. Putin is absolutely determined not only he's determined to conquer Ukraine. He's determined to wipe Ukraine off the map, and his maximalist aims, with which he started this war, have not gone away, and he will do everything he can to achieve it. Set against that is the fact that Ukraine has the upper hand, Russia is on the back foot, I think, providing the West continues and NATO continues to give and ramps up the support it gives Ukraine, Ukraine will, I think, ultimately prevail, and Putin will be faced with a collapse.
General Sir Richard Shirreff, former NATO Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, really good to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us in the briefing room.